On a quiet Kentucky night in 2013, police officer Jason Ellis left his shift and began the short drive home. He never made it. His cruiser was later found abandoned on the side of a rural road, and Jason had vanished into the darkness. It would take 4 years before his body was discovered deep in the hills marked by gunfire. Who would ambush a respected officer, and why tonight we'll uncover every chilling detail of the murder of Jason Ellis, a mystery that still grips an entire community. Before we begin, if you're drawn to real-life cold cases and unsolved crimes, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The man behind the badge. Bardstown, Kentucky. A small town with a big heart. The kind of place where church bells still echo on Sunday mornings and neighbors stop to chat on front porches long after the sun goes down. Nestled among rolling green hills and bourbon distilleries, Bardstown had built a reputation as one of America's most beautiful small towns. But beauty can hide shadows. For years, crime here was rare, the sort of minor trouble that could be smoothed over with a firm talk or a handshake. But beneath that postcard charm, the region wasn't immune to the darker currents of the world. Drugs had found their way into rural Kentucky, and with them came danger. And that's where Jason Ellis came in. Jason wasn't born into law enforcement. His first love was baseball. From the time he was a boy, he had an arm that could hurl a fastball with precision and power. That talent carried him far to college ball and eventually to a shot in the minor leagues. Friends remembered his discipline, the way he trained harder than anyone else, and how he brought a team together with his easy smile and unshakable focus. But baseball, like life, can change course without warning. When his athletic career ended, Jason turned toward another calling: serving and protecting. He joined the Bardstown Police Department in his early 30s, trading a bat and glove for a badge and sidearm. For Jason, it wasn't about authority, it was about responsibility. He treated the job the same way he had treated baseball, with dedication, teamwork, and a relentless drive to get the job done right. In the department, he quickly made a name for himself. Jason wasn't just a patrolman. He became a K-9 officer, partnered with a loyal police dog named Figo. Together, they worked drug interdiction, chasing down dealers, intercepting shipments, and dismantling operations. It was dangerous work that often put him in the crosshairs of people who had every reason to hate him. Still, Jason carried himself with calm resolve. Colleagues said he had a gift for reading a situation, for knowing when to be firm and when to de-escalate. He was the kind of officer you wanted next to you when things got bad, one fellow officer later recalled. Off duty. Jason was a family man through and through. He had married Amy, the love of his life, and together they were raising 2 young sons. In uniform, he was Officer Ellis, the man sworn to protect Bardstown. At home, he was simply Dad, the one who tossed baseballs in the yard, told bedtime stories, and made sure his boys knew they were loved. But as much as he loved his job, Jason knew the risks. Law enforcement in a small town might seem safe, but it could be deceptively dangerous. And the kind of drug work he did made him a target. He had put dangerous people behind bars, people who didn't forget and who might not forgive. May 25th, 2013 began like countless other shifts. Jason clocked in, worked his calls, and patrolled the quiet streets of Bardstown. He handled paperwork, checked on businesses, and made his rounds. There was no sign, no warning that this day would be any different from the others. Late that night, after completing his shift, Jason signed off. It was just after midnight. He got into his cruiser, a marked Bardstown police vehicle, and began the familiar drive home along the Bluegrass Parkway. The road cut through a quiet stretch of countryside, bordered by thick woods and steep embankments. This was a route Jason had driven hundreds of times before, but somewhere on that dark, winding stretch of highway, the routine broke. By the next morning, Bardstown would awaken to a chilling scene: Jason's cruiser parked on the shoulder, its emergency lights still flashing. His body nowhere to be found. At that moment, no one knew what had happened. Was he injured? Had there been a chase, a struggle, or something far worse? The answers would come slowly and painfully over the next 4 years. And when they finally did, they would reveal a truth far more sinister than anyone in Bardstown could have imagined. The night of the disappearance. It was just after midnight on May 25th, 2013. The Bluegrass Parkway was quiet, the kind of quiet you only find in rural Kentucky at night. The hum of the crickets, the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance, and the dark outline of the hills rolling against the night sky. Officer Jason Ellis had finished his shift in Bardstown. He wasn't racing home. There was no urgency in his voice when he signed off over the radio. Just another night, another drive, another promise to be home before his family woke up. The clock ticked toward 2 a.m. The highway was nearly empty. A thin fog clung to the low ground, muting the glow from his cruiser's headlights. For a man who had worked late shifts countless times, it was nothing unusual. But then, somewhere between the last curve and the next hill, Jason slowed down. Ahead, something was on the road. Not an accident, not a car, something else. Scattered across his lane was a mess of freshly cut tree branches. Not twigs blown in by the wind, no. These were deliberate. Large limbs, thick and green, arranged just so, blocking the way forward. It was strange. Very strange. Jason brought the cruiser to a stop, his emergency lights flicking on. The red and blue glows spilled out across the pavement, throwing jagged shadows into the trees. He stepped out, assessing the obstruction. For most drivers, it might have been an inconvenience turnaround, find another route. But for Jason, a police officer, it was instinct to clear the road. It could be a hazard to others. It could also be something more, a setup for an accident, maybe an illegal dumping site. He had seen stranger things in his years on the force. He left Figo, his K9 partner, in the cruiser. Some say that decision was telling. Perhaps he thought it was nothing serious. Perhaps he didn't want his dog darting into the road. Either way, Jason walked forward alone. The Bluegrass Parkway at night was dark, almost oppressively so. The trees crowded the roadside, their branches leaning in, forming pockets of blackness where the light didn't reach. Somewhere in that darkness, eyes could be watching. Jason began moving the branches piece by piece, dragging them toward the shoulder. He bent, lifted, tossed, returned for more. In the stillness, the sound of the branches scraping on the asphalt seemed unnaturally loud. Then somewhere in the unseen movement, no headlights approached, no engines idled nearby. But someone was there. Jason straightened, perhaps sensing it. That old police instinct, honed from years of reading people, of knowing when trouble was near, might have prickled at the back of his neck. But there was no time to react. Bardstown slept peacefully, while on that lonely stretch of road, something unthinkable unfolded. By sunrise, the first driver to pass spotted the cruiser still parked where Jason had left it. Emergency lights still flashed against the pale dawn. The driver slowed, expecting to see an officer on duty. Instead, the car was empty. No sign of Jason. No sound, but the faint clicking of the lights. The call went out. Officers rushed to the scene, scanning the roadside, shouting his name. They checked the ditches, the tree line, the surrounding fields. They called in helicopters to sweep the area from above. The questions came fast, and so did the fear. Why had he stopped here? Where was he now? And who had left those branches in the road? It didn't take long for the atmosphere in Bardstown to shift. By mid-morning, word had spread. The officer, everyone knew the man with the easy smile, the dedicated K9 handler, was missing. And the circumstances were too strange, too calculated to ignore. His wife, Amy, waited for answers that wouldn't come that day. His 2 boys, too young to understand the danger, only knew their dad hadn't come home. As officers expanded the search, they noticed something else. The branches weren't random debris. They were freshly cut, still damp with sap, their ends angled from a saw. Whoever had placed them there had done it recently, and deliberately. The scene no longer looked like an accident waiting to happen. It looked like a trap, but if it was a trap, it had been set for someone. Was Jason the target? Or had he stumbled into something meant for another driver? No one knew yet. But in the days ahead, the The evidence and the silence would make it hard to believe this was anything but a planned attack. For now, Bardstown could only wait and hope. The ambush. The morning Jason Ellis vanished, Bardstown awoke to a nightmare it had never imagined. The scene on the Bluegrass Parkway was quietened, but in the minds of investigators, it was anything but. The cruiser sat where Jason had left it, angled toward the obstruction. Figo, his canine partner, was still in the back seat, restless pacing. His nails clicked against the metal floor of the cage as if sensing something deeply wrong. It didn't take long for officers to follow the trail. Just beyond the pile of branches in the damp grass off the shoulder lay Jason's body. He hadn't collapsed from exhaustion or illness. The truth was far more brutal. Jason had been shot more than once, at close range. The realization hit like a gut punch. This was no accident, no random roadside tragedy. This was an ambush. The evidence told a chilling story. Whoever had placed those branches in the road knew that an officer would stop. They knew procedure, how an officer would approach, how he might work to clear the debris before calling for backup, and they had waited. The autopsy confirmed it. Jason was struck with shotgun rounds, the kind that could end a man's life in an instant. The wounds suggested the shooter had been positioned above him, possibly on the embankment, hidden by the thick summer foliage. It wasn't just a matter of bad luck. It was tactical. The branches, the positioning, the timing, all of it pointed to planning. The community struggled to process what they were hearing. Bardstown wasn't the kind of place where you imagined a police officer being hunted. There were no gangs here, no deep criminal networks, at least none that locals thought of. And yet here it was, the deliberate killing of one of their own. Reporters descended on the small Kentucky town. Words like targeted and execution style appeared in headlines. People whispered about grudges, about arrests Jason might have made, about criminals who might have wanted revenge. But if that was the motive, why here? Why like this? Investigators worked through every angle. Jason's recent cases, his personal life, his colleagues. Nothing fit neatly. Some in law enforcement wondered if this had been meant as a message not just to Jason, but to the entire department. If so, the message was chillingly clear. You're not untouchable. The details that emerged in the following days only deepened the unease. Jason's service weapon was still in its holster. His flashlight lay on the ground, switched off. There were no signs he had fired back. The attack had been so sudden, so precise, he likely never had a chance to draw his weapon. To those who knew him, that fact cut deep. Jason was experienced. He was trained. For him to have been caught so completely off guard, it meant the shooter had controlled the encounter from the very first moment. Then came the most disturbing possibility that Jason might have known his killer, that perhaps the last face he saw wasn't that of a stranger. In Bardstown, people began locking their doors at night. They glanced over their shoulders when walking downtown. Police patrols doubled, but the sense of safety that once wrapped the town like a warm blanket was gone. For Jason's family, grief was compounded by the absence of answers. Amy faced questions from her young sons she couldn't bring herself to answer fully. Where's Daddy, they'd ask, and she'd have to choose between truth and protection. Meanwhile, Figo, the loyal German shepherd who had ridden beside Jason on so many patrols, waited at home, ears perking at every sound, tail wagging at every knock on the door. Some said he knew Jason wasn't coming back. Others believed he waited for him until the very end. The case was no longer just a murder investigation. It was a wound in the center of Bardstown, and it bled suspicion, fear, and anger. Every time someone drove past that stretch of the Bluegrass Parkway, they saw it differently now. Not just as a road, but as a place where the shadows could hide a killer. And still, no arrest, no confession, no justice. But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, one thing became clear. Whoever had ambushed Jason Ellis had either vanished into the hills, or was still walking among them. 4 years in the dark. In the days after Jason Ellis's murder, the Kentucky State Police set up a task force. Dozens of detectives, analysts, and forensic experts were assigned. They combed the Bluegrass Parkway for overlooked evidence, retraced Jason's final movements, and interviewed anyone who might have seen something that night. The hope was that the first 48 hours would bring the break they needed. But those hours came and went. and no such break arrived. It wasn't that there were no leads. In fact, there were too many, most of them useless. People called in with vague sightings of suspicious vehicles, strange noises, or shadows in the woods. Some claimed to have seen headlights near the scene. Others swore they heard gunshots, but didn't think to report them at the time. The problem was nothing solid connected these fragments into a coherent picture. The murder weapon, a shotgun, was never recovered. Shell casings, none. The killer had been careful retrieving every trace before slipping away. There were no clear footprints, no DNA, and no witnesses who could identify anyone with certainty. What investigators did have was the method and intentional roadblock, a position of advantage and lethal precision. That combination told them they were dealing with someone who knew how to kill quickly and without mistakes. And yet, the why remained a mystery. Some detectives leaned toward the theory of retaliation. Maybe a criminal Jason had arrested, or someone tied to one of his cases. Others wondered if the ambush had been more personal, the result of a grudge no one outside Jason's private life could see. But Bardstown itself had other ideas. In a town where most people knew each other's names, speculation spread like wildfire. There were whispers about drug trafficking rings operating quietly in the county networks that didn't take kindly to law enforcement interference. Some even suggested Jason's murder could be tied to corruption, that the danger didn't come from outside the badge, but from within it. No one dared say such things too loudly. But in private kitchens over coffee, the conversations turned darker. If someone could kill a police officer in Bardstown and walk away untouched, what else was possible? The years that followed saw more tragedy. In 2014, just a year after Jason's death, another high-profile murder rocked the town, the killing of teacher Kathy Netherland and her teenage daughter Samantha. Their brutal deaths added fuel to theories that Bardstown had become a hunting ground for someone, or several someones, who knew they could act without fear of justice. For Jason's family, each new crime brought a cruel reminder his killer was still free. Amy, now raising their two boys alone, became a voice for her husband's case. She appeared in news interviews, community events, and vigils. Her message was always the same. Someone out there knows who did this. Please come forward. The police department continued to work the case, but publicly, there was little to share. Investigators admitted they were no closer to naming a suspect. Behind closed doors, they sifted through old case files, re-interviewed persons of interest, and sent whatever trace evidence they had to be retested as technology improved. Each anniversary brought renewed attention and renewed frustration. Candlelight vigils lit up Bardstown's town square. Blue ribbons were tied to fences and lampposts in Jason's honor. But the silence from the killer was deafening. By the third year, hope had begun to wear thin. Reporters moved on to fresher stories. Tips slowed to a trickle. And yet the shadow of the ambush still hung over the town. People avoided driving alone on the parkway at night. Officers kept their hands closer to their holsters during traffic stops. The community's trust in safety in each other had been shaken in a way it might never fully recover from. The fourth year brought no miracle, no sudden confession, no breakthrough from a hidden witness. The case file had grown thicker, but the answers remained out of reach. For the Ellis family, the hardest part wasn't the lack of justice. It was the fear that Jason's name would fade from memory, becoming just another cold case buried in a filing cabinet. But in Bardstown, those who had loved him refused to let that happen. They remembered his laugh, his kindness, the way he lit up when he talked about his sons. They remembered the man behind the badge, not just the victim in the headlines. And still, as the fourth anniversary passed, a single question burned hotter than ever. Who was out there in the dark that night, waiting for Jason Ellis to stop? A community haunted. By the time the fourth anniversary of Jason Ellis's murder passed, Bardstown, Kentucky had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The tight-knit community still hosted its annual festivals. Neighbors still waved at one another from across the street, and kids still rode their bikes through familiar neighborhoods. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet unease. A knowledge that somewhere out there a cold-blooded killer was still walking free. For Jason's widow, Amy's life had become a balancing act between keeping her husband's memory alive and protecting her sons from the darkest details of his death. They deserved to remember him for who he was, she would say, not for how he was taken. But in truth, Jason's final moments haunted everyone who knew him. The image of him pulling over that night, stepping out of his cruiser, and never making it home. The Kentucky State Police never closed the case. Every few months, detectives would revisit Leeds' rundown tips and meet with Amy to update her on what little they could. Over time, the file became a labyrinth. Hundreds of interviews, forensics reports, crime scene photos, maps, and theories stacked in a room dedicated to one thing: finding Jason's killer. Advances in technology offered glimmers of hope. Shotgun shell analysis had improved. Digital forensics allowed investigators to reprocess old data. DNA testing had become more sensitive, capable of detecting microscopic traces that might have been missed in 2013. But so far, none of those advances had been the breakthrough they needed. Bardstown made sure Jason's name didn't disappear into the archives of unsolved crimes. Each May, the community held a memorial service in his honor. Police officers, firefighters, neighbors, and friends gathered under candlelight to share stories. His fellow officers spoke about his dedication, his sense of humor, and the way he treated everyone, even the people he arrested, with respect. Parents remembered the school visits, where Jason would kneel down to speak to children at their level, making them feel safe. Blue ribbons lined the parkway, where he'd been ambushed, fluttering in the wind like quiet sentinels. To outsiders, they were just pieces of fabric. To Bardstown, they were a promise. As the years went by, theories about Jason's murder became almost as much a part of Bardstown's history as the crime itself. Some believed the ambush was professional, a calculated hit ordered by someone in the drug trade. Others thought it was personal, driven by a vendetta Jason never saw coming. A few whispered about darker possibilities, that corruption had played a role, and that the truth was being buried by people in power. But speculation was all it ever was. No one had been arrested. No one had been charged. Perhaps the most haunting part of the case wasn't what people said, it was what they didn't say. In a town this small, someone had to know something. A face, a name, a detail they had tucked away, too afraid to bring into the light. That silence weighed heavily on Amy. It meant that someone somewhere was still living their life unpunished, while her children grew up without their father. And in quiet moments, it meant she was still left with the same unanswered question she'd been asking since May 25th, 2013. Why Jason? Today, more than a decade later, Jason Ellis's story is more than a police case. It's a cautionary tale about the fragility of justice, the strength of community, and the need to speak out no matter how much time has passed. Because in the end, cold cases don't go cold for the families left behind. The wound stays open. The questions stay sharp. For Bardstown, the ambush of Jason Ellis will never just be a headline from 2013. It's a scar, a reminder that even the most peaceful towns can hold dark secrets. If you know anything about the murder of Officer Jason Ellis, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant it may seem, now is the time to speak up. You can contact the Kentucky State Police at 1-800-222-5555. You can leave an anonymous tip. You can give Amy and her sons the justice they've been waiting for. And if you've watched this far, help keep Jason's story alive. Like this video, share it with someone you trust, and leave a comment below with your thoughts about what happened that night. The more people who hear Jason's story, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay hidden. Because somewhere out there, someone knows, and silence is the only thing protecting them.